All right, Tom, our next question is from Chickster, and it is on entropy, reduction, and becoming love. The LCS, and I should point out LCS is Tom's acronym for the larger consciousness system or the higher intelligent awareness being. The LCS chooses to lower its entropy. One of the primary ways it does is to fragment, create IUOCs, which are individuated units of consciousness, that's us, and VRs, virtual realities, that's what we're in. For these IUOCs to experience, grow, and lower their own entropy. By IUOCs lowering their entropy, the LCS will lower its entropy accordingly. Many of these VRs are social systems, and I will point out that in your experience, you have indicated that there are other virtual realities other than ours. Many of these VRs are social systems. The optimum way for any social system to lower its entropy is by caring, sharing, working together, more organized, more love-based, less fear-based, becoming love, as you say. Now, I have to say, this question was submitted in January, and interestingly enough, these things are of caring, sharing, and working together. We're certainly seeing evidence of those things bubbling up, you know? Logic follows, he goes on to say, logic follows that becoming love is the direction the LCS chooses to go. We read that de-evolving beings or systems eventually become unstable. But we read of entities, virtual realities, physical matter realities, non-physical matter realities, are chock full of evil, violence, nor have anything to do with cooperation, harmony, and caring. As Tom describes at times, these places are far worse than our own PMR, and we would not like them. Someone has asked, why are they here, not only surviving, but apparently thriving? It can only be that the LCS does not care about love more than it cares about organization and order. Think structure of evil, such as Mafia, Khmer Rouge, ISIS. Maybe these evil empires in other reality frames flourish because they are ordered and organized. If that is the case, is becoming love irrelevant?
No, becoming love is not irrelevant. Matter of fact, becoming love is the most relevant thing. You are impatient. You need to be more patient. You need to take a bigger view. You sound exasperated because we haven't gotten there yet. You know, sort of reminds me of the child in the back seat of the car that, 5 minutes after you leave your driveway, headed on a long drive, you hear, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" It's, no, we're not there yet in this evolution of the quality of consciousness from low quality, which is very fearful. That's the evil you're talking about in the most egregious cases, toward love. And we're not there yet, but we're working on it and we're moving there. And yes, all those things in your preamble you said are true, about the IUOCs, about becoming love, about as we evolve, the larger system evolves, and about all of this is about growing consciousness and becoming love. It's also true that in most of the virtual realities, there's a long way yet to go. That doesn't mean that the larger consciousness system really prefers evil because evil's more organized. No, that's not it at all. Okay, you have to think of this entropy in terms of total entropy in the long term. Okay, now, if evil organizes like the mafia did, one of your examples, then that makes that evil organization more efficient. It can spread more evil. It can do more harm because it's organized. Okay, so it has an advantage of its organization in that it is has a longer reach than it had before because it's organized. It's more consistent because it's organized. But that little bit of entropy reduction is minuscule, is insignificant, is absolutely tiny compared to the amount of entropy it creates. You see, so you got a tiny, teeny little bit of entropy reduction because it's made its evilness more efficient, and you have a huge amount of entropy increase because now its evil is more efficient. Do you see? The net result of that is more entropy. The net result of that is lower quality of consciousness. It's de-evolution. That's why I say that, the negative things rather than the positive things, the fear-based things are all self-destructive, and they will eventually destroy themselves. But that doesn't mean because they all haven't destroyed themselves yet that that's not true. It's a slow process, this process of evolution. And if you look at our last 500 years or last 1,000 years of our experience here on this virtual reality called planet Earth, or called physical universe, then you'll see that we have been making progress, but slow progress. And not always steady progress. Sometimes we, go forward 2 steps and back a step. But still, if you look, you'll see that we do live in kinder, gentler, more prosperous times now than we ever have before. We value life more, we're kinder and more considerate of each other than any times before. And I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about humanity, altogether, average humanity. It's kind of the way we are. So be patient. It is working, but you can't rush it. You can't hurry it up. And it's not something that can be really moved faster by doing anything, because progress isn't a matter of doing. It's not a matter of learning or memorizing things. It's a matter of being. It's a matter of who we are. And to grow up, we have to change who we are. And we're just pretty slow at that, changing who we are. We tend to justify who we are rather than change who we are. We're much better at justifying everything that we do than we are of actually looking at it and seeing how we can make it better. So I hear your frustration that things are not peaceful and full of love and peace yet, but that does not mean that the system is an evil system, or that it condones evil, or that it likes evil best because evil is more organized. None of that makes any sense at all. It is what it is because we are what we are. If we grew up faster, if we could get rid of that fear, get rid of that frustration, get rid of that anger, and become love and care about other, then we would move it along more quickly. And that's the optimum thing we can do. So patience, we're working on it. It takes a long time, and evolution just can't be rushed. It's not something you can do. And the larger consciousness system, though it is the source of everything, it has to be respectful of our free will choices. It's not like the system is going to, make people behave. People have to have their own choices, their own free will. And you can make people, yes, the system has the power to make people behave, but that wouldn't help growth. Matter of fact, that would hinder growth. That would make growth slower. You can't force change. The change has to come from inside. So that's what the system is stuck with, is with us, with our free will. And it has learned through its own experimentation and its own growth that to try to force change try to make us behave is counterproductive. It makes everything worse. Just like if you try to force somebody to be the way you want them, or to behave themselves, or to be more loving, it will just backfire and make everything worse. Well, that's true for the system as well. Its hands are tied in as much that if it wants us to evolve as quickly as possible, then it needs to respect our free will and let us figure it out as we figure it out. And yes, the negative will crumble under its own nastiness, and the positive will persevere and go forward. It just takes a long time. So be patient and do your part to move it along. That is, get rid of your fear. And with that fear will go your anger and your frustration.
Thank you, Tom. So apparently these collective entities will de-evolve because there are limits, and there is no limit to the love and caring that we are capable of doing.
The limits are self-created in the sense that if you are organized evil, then the more evil you get, the more destructive you are of everything, including yourselves. In other words, if you're head of an evil empire, then you have all kinds of other people wanting to knock you off because they want to be the head of the evil empire. So heads of evil empires generally don't last very long, or they only last if they're extremely ruthless, which makes people even more committed to getting rid of them. You see, it creates its own destruction in that way. So it is limited. It can't grow but so much until it pulls itself down. Whereas the positive has an open end. It keeps growing and building, and the more it builds, the more able it is to build more. It just keeps reinforcing itself. But patience is required. It's a very slow thing. After all, we've been working on this for almost 200,000 years, and we only see real visible progress maybe in just the last, 10,000 years or so. We see a fair amount of progress going on. Just think of, all the rest of that time, how slow progress was. Well, the nature of progress is that it accelerates. The more progress you make, the easier it is to make more progress. So we see things are changing more quickly. So now that we actually can see the change almost, definitely from century to century and almost from decade to decade, now's not the time to throw up your hands in frustration. Now's the time to double down and get rid of that fear, because change is coming ever more quickly, which is a good thing.
Thank you. And I think Chickster might benefit from the interview we did called Origins of Consciousness, which shows it's putting out some conjecture. It's just a thought kind of process that you did on the LCS, which may explain how it arrived at love is the answer, and how it arrived at becoming love is the way. Allowing free will is the way. So I'll move on to the next question, which is from Pateria on rebellious behavior and social change. Now this ties in too, and coincidentally this question is also in January. So we're looking at it with a fresh look to this because of the current COVID-19 thing. He goes on to say, I have heard Tom say on a few occasions that going out and fighting against the powers that be is not the solution to the world's problems, and that we won't see significant change unless the level of consciousness of humanity as a whole is raised. His view makes sense to me. However, I was wondering what Tom's point of view would be on the Extinct Rebellion movement in the UK. Now, this Extinct Rebellion movement is focused on climate change and on trying to wake people up and force governments into doing something. So This organization is now advocating direct action by gathering large groups of people to disrupt normal everyday activities, blocking city traffic, and they plan to send drones into Heathrow airports, which will block flights. These people are deeply concerned about the future of this planet because of the impending catastrophe of climate change. You could also say that they are very afraid. Given the apathy and inaction that we have had so far, isn't this a way to wake people up and force governments to do something about the situation?
You will, by doing things like that, you will change opinions, and you will, you will get attention. But the problem is the opinions you change and the attention you get will all be negative. It won't help you with the climate situation. It's not going to help galvanize things to a better end. All it's going to do is slow down the progress that we might make otherwise. In other words, that kind of activity of creating dysfunction, traffic jams, threatening aircraft taking off and landing, which of course taking off and landing is the most, shall I say, the most critical time in an air flight. That's where all the crashes happen. Well, I shouldn't say all of them, but that's where almost all of the crashes happen, because when you're very close to the ground, you only have seconds between something going wrong and crashing. So that's a very vulnerable space there. So it's a little, that would be a very high risk move to make. You may end up killing 400 or 500 people with a little bad luck, but your little RV got sucked up in an engine or something right at a very critical time and taking off or landing. So in any case, that is not helpful. It's part of the problem, not part of the solution. You're confusing this issue of getting people's attention by doing things that are attention getting and helping your cause. You're confusing that with something that Henry David Thoreau talked about, 100, 200 years ago. And he was talking about peaceful, what should we call it? Civil disobedience, but peaceful civil disobedience. Now, causing traffic jams and, sending drones around where airplanes are landing and taking off is not peaceful. Not peaceful at all. That's threatening. It's at the very least very annoying to a lot of people. It creates a lot of negative attitudes. So what you're thinking, perhaps, is doing things like Gandhi did, Martin Luther King, and others who used this peaceful civil disobedience, but they did that very carefully, not to annoy people, not to create havoc, not to risk life. They did it in ways that basically, like Martin Luther King sit downs, where everybody would just go and sit, not in the back of the bus where they were supposed to sit. They'd sit wherever there was a seat, and they'd just sit there. And the bus would stop, and the police would come out, and they'd pick these people up out of their seats and haul them off to jail. But they just kept doing that, which forced the system to demonstrate its bad racist behavior. It's bad racist attitude, and it demonstrated it to everybody, you see, and that was a good thing. But they didn't do anything that would upset anybody else. They didn't go in and throw people off the bus so that they could sit there, or any other kind of, pushy or annoying behavior. That's different. This idea of causing traffic jams, being a nuisance, and threatening aircraft, and inconveniencing people in order to get them to give credibility to your your ideas about global warming, creates just the opposite. You're a nuisance. You're something to stop and get rid of. What you do is you hurt the credibility for global warming. Now people look at it and they associate you and your nuisance with global warming activists. And now global warming becomes a bad thing, to be an activist in, or a bad thing to support, because the people that support it are annoying, causing trouble, risking lives. And so it does just the opposite of what you're saying. If you want to use civil disobedience, and use it well to get people to see your point and see your side, you must do it in a way that hurts, inconveniences, and annoys no one except the authorities, who are, having bad laws, like racist laws. Okay. Now you don't annoy the authorities by annoying, thousands of people caught in traffic jams. That doesn't really annoy the authorities directly. It annoys all the people caught in traffic jams. Yes, it annoys the people. I mean, the authorities a little bit, but you're not making the right point. The point isn't about traffic jams or about how the authorities work to clear traffic jams. That's not the point. You see, when Martin Luther King used civil disobedience, he used it in an intelligent way, in a wise way, and it works. It works very well. So civil disobedience is a good thing when used properly. But the things you describe about the drones and the traffic jams is counterproductive. It makes you part of the problem. You're part of what makes our world not work so well. You just up the amount of fear and anger and annoyance that people walk around with. You're increasing the everyday negativity in the world by doing things that are negative, by hurting, you see. So you may have the people doing this, may have an intention. I do that with a little I intention of doing good, but they're doing more harm than good. If you take the sum of what they're doing, they've hurt their cause more than they've helped it. They've made global warming something that now the governments can't take more seriously, because if they did, they'd be giving into the hoodlums that are causing traffic jams and flying drones, and they can't be seen to be weak on hoodlums, you see. So it makes everything harder, not easier. It's hurting your source. And I would suspect that if the people who are doing this really looked at themselves seriously, they wouldn't see their motivation as caring so much about global warming. I think that's probably an excuse. I think their motivation is that they're frustrated and they're angry, both negative things, both fearful things. So they are negative and fearful, and they're expressing that negativity and that fear in terms of more dysfunction, more harm, more annoyance, more aggravation. And that makes them feel better because their egos feel better. Oh, look what we did. We caused a lot of trouble. And maybe they feel powerful or something because of that, but it doesn't help their cause. I think their cause truly is to blow off some of their own frustration and their their own anger. And that's why they're doing that, because that's the act of angry people, frustrated people, not the act of people who are really trying to benefit a cause, when in fact they're damaging the cause, not benefiting it.
All right, Tom, thank you on that. Another question from Pateria is on the treatment of criminals. Does MBT provide any perspective on the treatment of criminals, locking people up for decades or people receiving the death penalty for certain crimes? What is the low entropy solution to dealing with people who commit awful crimes?
Well, the low entropy solution in dealing with anybody for any reason is to be caring, is to be positive, is to try to reclaim, is try to help, try to encourage them to grow. That's what you do when you interact with anybody. Now, if we take criminals as a group and just talk about them, there's a little difference in as much as they've been deemed to be criminals, and the society, if it feels like they're going to continue to be criminals, and they think that's a high probability, then they can lock them up just to keep them from committing more crimes. So if you're a serial murderer and you murder people because you're insane, and that's what makes a homicidal maniac, is somebody who murders people because they're insane, then to lock that person up so they just don't go on murdering people because they're insane is a good idea. You take them out of the larger society. But that's a very extreme case. Okay. Most people, not necessarily that extreme case of homicidal maniacs, but most people have both positive and negative aspects to themselves, to their personalities, to their worldviews. And we ought to have our incarceration not be focused on vengeance, which I think it is most of the time. You did something awful, so now we're going to subject you to something even more awful, or as awful as we can. Instead of vengeance, we ought to be looking at how we can help these people turn themselves into good citizens. People are people, they all have potential. And even the worst criminals have potential to be better. And we need to find ways to do the research required to find ways to connect to that potential and help develop it so they can be turned around to be good citizens. And when it comes to capital punishment, which is killing people for whatever it is they've done, to me, that seems very barbaric. It seems like a bad idea. The downside is that you kill somebody. That's a pretty steep downside. I mean, if you have any empathy at all, for people, and for people who have made mistakes or done things wrong, or for any reason they end up in a situation where they're convicted of a crime, you have to see that there is still potential and value there. You just have to find it, uncover it, encourage it, work with it, and do that for as long as it takes. Now, some people may be incorrigible. They may never get to the point that they are fit to turn back out into society. You may just not be able to work with them. They may not be able to do that, in which case then they're going to stay in there. And I would agree, you don't send people out of the criminal system until they are prepared and ready and have the right attitudes toward being a productive member of the society. That's the point.
Thank you, Tom. The next question comes from Lanner and Saner on uniting with other spiritual groups. Over the last couple of years, I've been coming across quite a few spiritual type individuals who come very closely to the same ideas as MBT and Tom. Because these ideas are becoming more mainstream, would there be a benefit in coming together on consciousness terminology between these individuals and their following? Ideas like heaven and hell become general terminology for spiritual and religious groups in describing their ideas. Doing this for MBT-like ideas could help remove the divide between these groups. In my personal opinion, I feel this could help bring together these individuals and their followings. Also, by doing this, removing the organic habit of following a single topic leader and instead helping shed more light on this information. Now, I know you have, I guess what he's thinking is something like a dictionary of consciousness. I know you have terminology and acronyms that you have researched yourself, that you have put into scientific kind of terms, and you have experimented and done research with that. Do you think there could ever be a complete kind of collective?
Eventually, that will probably occur, but it's probably too early for that yet. But I think eventually that would be a natural occurrence, as he says, as spiritual ideas and concepts grow and evolve and spread and become more commonplace and so on. There will just naturally become a movement to standardize the terminology, if you will, just so people can talk to each other more efficiently. Standardization is often a lower entropy route because it makes communication much more accurate and much simpler if we all kind of understand the same concepts with the same words. But you can't get there until people have grown up enough to where they see the fundamental likeness and sameness of all these various spiritual groups. In other words, if you can look at all the religions and all the spiritual groups and see what's similar about them, then that's good. And you're ready for that new, sleeker, more efficient vocabulary. But if you are a person that is part of a spiritual group, and in your mind, those other groups are just wrong because they're different than your group, and your group has it right and everybody else is wrong, then you're not ready for that. You would resist it. You would resent it. You wouldn't want to use anybody's words because all your words are the right words and their words, of course, are the wrong words. So as much as you have people who are very fixed and belief bound, fixed in their thinking and very belief bound, if you have many of those, then this common vocabulary is just not going to work well. Well, all you'll do is stir up arguments. Trying to use a common vocabulary will end up being something that's part of the problem. It will trigger too many negative things. It will become something to fight about and argue about. And instead of something that helps people, become more love and become more caring, it'll be something that's divisive and causes polarization. So I don't think we're quite ready for that yet. We have too many people that are still belief bound, and they will not cooperate with that. But yes, in general, as we evolve and there's less and less people bound by their egos and their beliefs, surely the lexicon will develop such that we all can talk to each other very simply about these subjects. But I don't think we're there yet. As a matter of fact, I guess from your perspective of using common terminology, then I'm probably part of the problem because I made up a lot of terms, and IUOC and the larger conscious system and free will awareness units, and I made up a lot of these terminologies just because I wanted to avoid terminologies that were similar but were very belief laden, because I didn't want people to come to MBT with beliefs. I didn't want MBT to become a religion, if you will. It's not an inclusive thing. It's not a belief thing. So I wanted to state my ideas in a way that didn't entangle them with other people's beliefs. So I have an experience packet, you see, and I use that term, experience packet. We have a life, we live it, the avatar dies, then we go get another experience packet. Well, that's Tom Campbell talk. Nobody else says that. Other people, meet that and, say that in different ways. But I wanted to avoid all those ways that are couched in belief and with emotional ties to them. So reincarnation is not a word that's in my books. Experience packets is, because the experience packet is a real clear concept of what we're talking about. It's a packet of experience. That's just what it is. And it comes with no belief things stuck to it. Oh, reincarnation, you're one of those Eastern people. It doesn't have any of that. So I'm hoping that people would actually read my stuff and think about it, think about the concepts without getting twisted up in their beliefs and in their prejudices. And hopefully by doing that, they'd grow up some. So I avoided using everybody else's terminology. So I'm maybe one of the worst offenders of that, bringing up new terminology when there was old terminology that meant something very similar. But I had a reason for that, and it's because we're not ready yet. Most people are tied up in with their egos and with their beliefs. And it's better to be clear to get your concepts across than it is to be tied to a belief system that some of the people think is wonderful, the other people think is ridiculous. So they won't even read your stuff because it has goofy words in it like reincarnation, or God, or other sorts of things that they just can't read about. So anyway, it's kind of word games that we're playing to not trigger people's trigger points so they actually can read about the concepts and perhaps grow from understanding the concepts. And that will die out as we go forward in time. As more and more people get the concepts, more and more people will find a vocabulary to voice those concepts that is good for them. And if that dominates, then all the old words that have a lot of belief things stuck to them will just fall into disuse. So yes, that will happen, but I don't think we can push it. I think it's one of those things that just happens naturally. Although if you wanted to sit down and make a spiritual dictionary, of terms and concepts, well, that might help it along a little bit. Some people would read that and find it very interesting, and it would upset some people. But if that's a thing that you would like to do, I'd say go do it. Go do it. Maybe it'll speed the process up just a little, but it won't happen till its time is ready.
Thank you, Tom. Another question from Pateria on Tom's emotions. To what extent do you feel emotions? Thomas talked about how seeing loved ones or friends being self-destructive is sad, and he sometimes talks about living life with joy, but it must be something different than what most of us experience. For example, I get overwhelmed when singing music sometimes. I might shed tears as a result. I don't know if that kind of thing is merely a product of ego or not. I have a sense that Tom has acquired a lot of wisdom and that he must be somewhat detached from the ordinary cares and roller coaster emotions that affect most of us. Can you comment?
Yes, kind of yes and no to that. I guess I'll pick it apart and answer pieces of it at a time. Emotion is a natural thing to consciousness. Emotion is part of how we communicate, how we interact. It's an expression of our feelings. Feelings are innate to consciousness. We not only have this intellectual part, but we have an intuitive part. And inside that intuitive part are feelings, how we feel about things. And when you grow up, you do become more detached. But the word detached does not mean aloof, unconnected to, above it all. That's not what detached means. It means detached from ego, detached from fear. That's what detached means. You unattach yourself from fear and ego and belief. Okay. So you can be detached and still be emotional. Those two are not opposites, or they are not exclusive to each other. So compassion, joy, uh, empathy, all these come with feelings. They're not just ideas. They're not intellectual. Most of that stuff happens in feeling space. And in feeling space, you can be passionate about your feelings. Being detached and being passionate are not incompatible. So yes, you are singing or you're playing music or even just listening to music. You can get emotional. You can shed tears. You know, happy endings, sad endings, you know, of stories and movies and books. You can shed tears because you have feelings associated with what you're reading or what you're seeing or what you're hearing or what you're singing. And that's all good. That's you exercising your expression of feeling as consciousness. So those are good things to do. That's not, if you shed tears and obviously you're not detached, then that must be ego. That's the wrong way of thinking about it. Feelings are natural to people. Okay. Now, the kind of feelings you're talking about are all, of course, good feelings. You know, the feeling of love, the feeling of peace, or even the feeling of sadness that you see something that's very tragic going on. If you're watching a movie that's tragic or reading a story that's tragic, or your life is tragic, or somebody else's life close to you is tragic, you can have strong feelings about that. You can have passion about that. And that's a good thing. A good thing not to overdo. You can get lost in that to the point that you become dysfunctional. That's not a good thing. But as long as you don't get lost in it to the point of being dysfunctional, it generally is a good thing. To cut ourselves off from our own emotion it's like cutting off your right hand. You know, it's just dysfunctional. It's not, you know, we're made to have two hands, and if you only have one, then it kind of makes the rest of your life more difficult and less functional. So now let's talk about, you know, you talked about me, you know, how is Tom and what does he feel and is he different than other people? Well, having said all that, yes, I'm generally pretty different than most people. And that is, most people are full of fear, ego, and beliefs. That's just typical. I'm not so full of those things. I've been working on that for many, many years. Actually, many, many experience packets. I've been working on that. And I am detached in the sense that I do not get caught up in all the general fear, ego, and belief stuff that most people get caught up in. And I call that soap opera, you know, soap opera life. Well, many people live in a soap opera. You know, they're constantly arguing with and annoyed with, you know, their mother-in-law or their sister or their father or their brother or their neighbors or somebody. They're constantly at odds with their boss and coworkers, and their life is just this long string of aggravation and upset and annoyance and tears, hand wringing, gnashing of teeth. You know, all of that is just an everyday part of their life. They live in a soap opera life. It's emotional, but the emotions are negative. The emotions are all fear-based. They're upset, they're annoyed, they're angry. You see, these are all negative kinds of emotions. And no, I don't live a life like that. And that is, you know, kind of an average life for many people, is that they live in a soap opera. They can never get everybody to be the way they should be. As much as they try to manipulate everything, it just doesn't work. And people just don't act the way they should act. So you manipulate a little harder. Well, nobody likes to be manipulated. So you get pushback from all these people because they know you're trying to manipulate them and they're trying to manipulate you. And if you are part of a social situation where everybody's trying to manipulate everybody else to make everybody else the way they want them to be, well, that's going to be a soap opera. That's going to be full of negative emotional garbage. So you should be detached from that, because detached, as I say, means being detached from your fear, ego, and belief. You're no longer attached to those things. You're no longer attached to belief, attached to your ego, attached to your fear. By that attached, I mean you're no longer affected by it. You're no longer giving it your energy. The fear, ego, and beliefs are no longer controlling your choices. That's what I mean by being detached from them. And that's a very good thing. But that doesn't mean that you don't have emotions. It doesn't mean that you don't have passion, that you don't care. See, some people think being detached means you just float above it all. You're just up there and you're not concerned. Well, when you are with a bunch of people who are living a soap opera life, that's the way you appear to them. You appear that you're just above it all, floating, floating through and whatever, because you're not getting angry and you're not getting on their side against the other side. And you're not saying, oh, how awful, how could they say that? And yes, you're right, you should be angry. And you're not down there, pitching dirt and fussing and all that kind of stuff with them. So you seem like you're just above it all, floating along and just don't care. But that's not the case. You just don't care about ego and fear and belief junk. That's what you don't care about, you see. But there are things you do care about, and those things you can have great passion for. So maybe that'll help you, get these ideas straightened out in your head. Emotions are part of our life's richness. We want emotions. We don't want to float through life without emotions in this, this detached state of being above it all. That's just another form of ego. I'm above it all. You peasants down there, you're always in a soap opera, but I'm better than that. You see, that's just more ego, more belief, more junk to, to get detached from.
Well, thank you, Tom. The next question is from Astral. And speaking from just your experience with consciousness and research, he asks, if someone commits suicide, do they have to come back to this reality system, or can they choose to go wherever they want? Can they go learn and grow somewhere else, or is there a rule where they have to come back where they left off?
There is no such rule. Actually, there are no rules that tell you what you have to do. You have free will. You get to exercise that free will in all stages, whether it's here with an avatar, the choices you make, or whether it's when some other, what we would see as a non-physical virtual reality. It doesn't, wherever you are, you get to make choices. So however your life ends here, be it suicide or old age or being run over by a truck in an automobile accident, you always have choices. And if you are encouraged, say, well, are you ready to get back in that game? And you say, no, I don't want to be back in that game. Well, then you won't be. Nobody will force you to do anything you don't want to do. That would be abridging your free will. The system doesn't do that because the system's learned that if you run over people's free will, you cause more dysfunction than you cause good. It's not a good thing to do. It doesn't help anybody grow up by running over their free will. That is, anybody that's an adult. Now, yes, we do run over children's free will. When your 3-year-old wants to go play in the street, you say no. And if they want to play in the street anyway, then you put a fence around your yard and put a lock on it. So we do run over the free will of little children and perhaps people who are not capable of making choices because they don't see big pictures. So we do that some. But once somebody's an adult, then we let them make choices for themselves. And as they grow older, between that 3-year-old and that 18-year-old, we give them more and more of that space to make their own choices until eventually we let them make all their own choices, good or bad. If they want to make bad choices, or if they do make bad choices, then we have to accept that. That's their choice. We may be able to help them see it differently, but there's nothing we can do about it. We have to let them be and make their own choices. That's how they make their own feedback that'll help them one day make better choices. So no, you don't have to come back here for any particular reason. You can go other places, or you can just sit out and not go anywhere. That's your choice.
Would you say that the real downside to ending your own life is that you lose the opportunity to grow? I mean, from your perspective as a consciousness researcher only, and you're more likely to continue in a downward spiral, which is de-evolution. Would you say that's maybe the biggest downside?
You know, there's two major downsides to suicide. And one is that you no longer have the opportunity to make good choices and learn and grow in that lifetime, because you're going to end that lifetime. So you have a certain amount of time invested, say, in growing up. And it's usually not until you get a little older that you start seeing bigger pictures and start understanding things more deeply. And if you make an investment, say up until the time you're 35 or 40 in growing up and that far, and then you commit suicide, well, you just got to the point where you're liable to do most of your growing is in your 40s and 50s and 60s. You know, you're going to do a lot of growing then, because you have more experience, you understand the world better, you have bigger perspectives. So you have that sense that if you commit suicide, then you are throwing away all the investment that you've made up to that point, and you are throwing away all the potential you had for growing up positively. Okay, now people who commit suicide usually are what we call depressed, clinically depressed. And when you are depressed, what happens is that your vision, your sense of decision space narrows and narrows, so until you have blinders on. You know, you just have blinders. You can't see anything except what's wrong. You can't see anything except the problem. You become obsessed with that problem to the point that everything else disappears in your life. The fact that there are people who love you, people who care about you, you know, things to do, whatever, all of that isn't important, because you're obsessed with what's wrong, with what the problem is, with your failure. And you're obsessed with the idea that that will never change. It'll always just be that way, as if you had a crystal ball and could read the future. Well, what's going on there is all the good things in your life, all the positive things, all the opportunities you have are still there. They're out there. You just can't see them. So you do have potential. You know, a person that feels like that says, "Oh, I don't have any potential." Well, that's just because they're depressed, and they have narrowed their decision space to just what's wrong, and they can't get by that. So that's the problem. But that doesn't mean they don't have a lot of positive, good potential. They do, but they can't see it. So you see, that's the downside, is that you exit leaving a whole lot of positive growth potential that you could have worked with and could have developed into good, you know, entropy reduction growth. It was there. You just couldn't see it because you were so focused on what was bad. And that's a shame then. You lose that potential that developed. You lose that investment. So that's one thing that's negative about suicide. The other thing that's negative about suicide in the long term is that anything, not just suicide, but anything that you do, it makes it easier to do it again. It doesn't matter what you're doing, but particularly if you're doing something distasteful. You know, for most people, if they were back 300 years ago when people hunted, you know, to find something to eat, and they had to do something like skin a rabbit, you know, and, you know, cut the rabbit and pull out the guts and take the skin off. And a whole lot of people today would go, "Ooh, I don't want to do that," you know, but the hardest time is the first time. And after that, it gets easier, and then it gets easier and gets easier. You get adjusted to things, you get used to things, and anything's like that. You know, anything you do, you can do more easily with doing it. The more you do it, well, with suicide, what happens is that if you get to the point where you get in a jam, life doesn't seem to be good, and the way you react to that is by depression, and then you do suicide. Now you have another lifetime. And in this next lifetime, you still have to learn the same things you had to learn in that last lifetime, because just dying doesn't make you wise. You know, you don't grow up because you die. You grow up by making good choices. So you still have to make good choices. So you get another lifetime when the going gets tough. Well, it's a little easier to commit suicide the next time because you've done that once. So it's a little easier to do because maybe you've done that 3 or 4 times or 5 or 10 times. So you get to be a person that, you know, when the going gets tough, the not so tough exit. When the going gets tough, the not so tough find a way out. They bail. They don't work through it. They don't put the shoulder to the, you know, to the wheel and the nose to the grindstone and push their way through it. Instead, they bail out. And that can become a habit. It can be a way of dealing with hardship, a way of dealing with things that are difficult. I mean, we all have difficult times. We all have those times when we feel like life couldn't get possibly any worse. You know, a lot of people going through divorces or, you know, have, you know, a child die or a parent die. They go through times when they just feel very depressed. Well, that happens to people, but most of us work our way out of it. We may wallow in self-pity for a while and have our blinders on and not want to deal with anything positive, but we outgrow it. We get over it. We go on. We continue then to actualize our potential. And that's the way we should be. But if we commit suicide as a solution, then it's a little easier for us to, oh, I'm in a wad now. I had a divorce. Well, let's just end it. We'll start another one. Well, now I've got some other kind of jam or something happened, and well, let's just end it, start another one. And what happens is your evolution becomes very slow because you put in a lot of investment, but you hardly ever stick with it long enough to reap the rewards of the investment. So that is a downside of suicide, in that it can become a habit. It can become an easy out. Now, after having said all that, there is no, quote, punishment, unquote, for suicide. It's not like suicide victims are a special, you know, it's an awful thing to do and you get punished for it and you have to, whatever this lady said, you have to come back here and have the same problem and get in the same situation. You don't. You have to deal with the same fears that you had before. You have to get through life. You have to make choices to get, you know, to grow just like you did before. But there's no punishment. It's not like, you know, you get a demerit or you lose, you know, 10 points, you know, take away your gold stars. It's not like you get punished for it, but the downsides are real. And that is, it's easier the next time. And the downsides are real in the sense that, look, you're going to have to learn this stuff one way or another. You've got to grow up, you've got to evolve. And to do that, you're going to have some pain, you're going to have hardship. And when you have that hardship, you have to not let your decision space reduce down to nothing but the hardship. You have to see bigger pictures. You have to get through it. You have to accept it and go on. That's part of growing up. So, you know, if you don't do it this time, you're going to have to do it again. You know, you get to do it next time. Doesn't mean you'll be in exactly the same situation. It just means that you still have to make choices that evolve you. And if you're having a hard time making good choices, then you're still going to have a hard time making good choices. But that's what growing up is. Everybody has a hard time growing up. Growing up is not an easy thing to do. We have hard choices. And unfortunately, we humans, if we don't feel pain, we don't really try very hard to change. Pain is what drives us forward. Pain is what pushes us to grow up. I mean, it would be nice if that wasn't the case. And as more you grow up, the less that is the case. The more grown you are, the more you grow, not from pain, but just from deeper understandings. But when you're not very grown up and you don't feel any pain, well, then you don't care to change anything. You know, let it ride. Everything's great. I don't feel any pain. So why should I change anything? And then you don't grow much. So most of us who aren't very grown up try, you know, mostly grow up because we get pushed. Things happen that hurt. We do things where we get smacked. smacked by life, and we have to deal with it. And how we deal with that is how we grow up. Well, if you refuse to deal with it and you just commit suicide to get away from it, well, you lost your opportunity to grow up there. You could have dealt with that. Now you'll have to deal with something else, some other situation, not that situation, but just some other situation. You're going to have to deal with pain in order to grow up, because without the pain, you refuse to grow up. So you see, you're kind of stuck here. You might as well tough it out and get through it and grow up than end it and then get into a cycle of ending it whenever things get tough. And now you're having a really hard time evolving because you're opting out too often. And usually when people get like that, the cure for that is the system tries to put them in very kind, gentle spaces where they don't have too many challenges, where they don't have too many hard things to get through. Well, the good news about that is they go through a life and maybe they're happy and everything's fine and then they're gone, but they don't grow up much because they don't have any challenges. You know, they don't have any real serious challenges in their life. Everything's just kind of keeps on keeping on, and maybe life is boring or maybe it's not, but they come out the other side with very little growth. But they come back with confidence. I got through that and I didn't have to end it. And then they go through another one. They get through it. They didn't have to end it. And now you're rebuilding confidence to where the next time they get something a little more challenging, instead of just ending it, they're more inclined to try to push through it this time. So see, the system has ways of bringing these people along. So it's not like, you're going to hurt your chances for growth forever because you've picked suicide a few times. The system will work with you, try to put you in simple situations until you can get over that and get a little more confidence and build you back up, just like we do with children. We do that with children. You know, the children are 6 and 7 years old, and they want to play basketball. So we get a basket and we put it 3 feet lower than the actual basket is supposed to be, just so they can succeed rather than get frustrated because they don't have the muscle to push that basketball that high in the air. So that's kind of what happens. You get treated more like a child. You're given things that are simpler and easier to do until you build confidence, and it works. And eventually you just keep on going. So it's not like it's an ending path or something terrible that you can't get out of. It just makes your evolution a little less efficient. So suicide is not efficient to evolving. It terminates your experience before you've actually actualized the potential you have in that experience. So it's inefficient. So I guess that's the best thing to describe it. It's an inefficient way to approach evolution of consciousness.
You've pointed out all of that very well. And the one thing I know that you emphasized in your books is that the LCS, this system that we have to learn, is all about being efficient. So you're really contributing to slowing up the system and slowing up your own evolution and our evolution as a collective. So that was very well described. Thank you, and I hope that answered your question, Astral. Thank you, Tom, for taking on all of these questions. We have caught up with all of the questions we didn't have a chance to get through in the regular Fireside chats, and I hope you appreciate these. And thanks again, Tom.
And I'd like to say, Donna, at the end here, that I'm sorry we didn't get to these questions. You mentioned there that some of them were back in January. Okay, so
Yes.
That's January, February, March, and now we're partway through April.
Yes.
That's too bad, but the questions were good questions. All of the questions I've done in this kind of Fireside chat addendum that we're going to put out, they've all been good questions, and they deserve to be answered. So I'm glad we didn't just let them disappear because they got old.
That's
I'm glad
right.
you went back and collected them all and made a special effort to do this and get those answered and out there. And I would like the listeners to read that that was all Donna's doing. She's
Oh,
the
wow.
one that collected them all and kept track of them and said, you know, we've got these unanswered questions and they're getting awfully old. We need to do this. And she set this up with me, and we're doing it. And I appreciate that because the questions are good. Those are questions that other people have, viewpoints and ideas and problems and issues that people have. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to help people make sense of their world, their life, and themselves.
Yes. Well, you're the value here with your answers. So thank you again. And I hope that you enjoy the answers to these. Yeah, with 10 or 15 people in the Fireside chat, and it's only 3 hours at a time, sometimes they add to the questions and we just can't fit them in. I've tried to slide a question in here or there, and it just didn't seem to work, and they've added up. So we've done it, and I thank you very much.
You're welcome.